Well, it's Monday. Good morning, all. Lovely sunshine out today. Looks like it's going to be a beautiful day. Time to begin with some news talk. Yeah, we get together from 9 to noon and discuss matters every weekday, so pour that second cup of coffee and get ready to participate. The telephone number, if you should decide to join the conversation, is 831-265-5050, 831-265-5050. Let's bring up the call screen so that when you call in, I'll be able to spot it right away and bring you on immediately. Phone call is the first priority. You call, we'll get you on right away. Okay, I'm going to begin today with something I didn't think I was going to begin with, because there's new information. I'm looking at this morning's newspaper, Monday, November 17th, 2025. And this is the Wall Street Journal, the largest circulation newspaper in the country. The Wall Street Journal is a Rupert Murdoch publication. Its editorial pages are conservative. Its news pages are accurate. And I'm looking here at the far left side, right below the masthead, above the fold. President turns up heat over Epstein measure. Trump takes aim at fellow Republicans ahead of House vote on more disclosures. President Trump is making a last-ditch push to dissuade House Republicans from supporting a measure to release files related to Jeffrey Epstein in what is shaping up as a major test of loyalty to the president. That's this morning's newspaper. So, I get up at 7. By a few minutes past that, I've gone on. My paper guy generally gets the paper here. Today, I saw him delivered at about 7:10. Brought it in, so I'm reading this as I'm having my grape nuts flakes. And a little over an hour later, I come out here, light off the computer, go to Real Clear Politics, and up here, top left, Trump administration. Trump urges House vote to release Epstein files, marking reversal. I'm thinking to myself, holy smoke. I mean, for a politician to reverse field and suddenly take a position opposing the one he had taken, that we've seen that before, for gosh sakes. We call it a flip-flop. And it's nothing new. But I don't think I've ever seen one quite as abrupt as this. From a front page headline in this morning's paper, telling us how Trump is fighting and dying to keep the House from voting this. Now we have a new post on Truth Social. I will share it with you. As I said on Friday night, on board Air Force One to the fake news media, House Republicans should vote to release the Epstein files because we have nothing to hide. Now, this is interesting. I hadn't spotted this before. Now we're all thinking together. His first sentence here, as I said on Friday night is what? This is Monday, so that's 3 days ago. So if this is the case, then Trump changed his position 3 days ago. And the Wall Street Journal somehow missed it. Now, given Mr. Trump's penchant for saying things that cannot be taken at face value, I'm going to trust the Wall Street Journal's reporting over Donald Trump's presentations. Just my judgment. Let's keep going. House Republicans should vote to release the Epstein files because we have nothing to hide, and it's time to move on from this Democrat hoax perpetrated by radical left lunatics in order to deflect from the great successes of the Republican Party, including our recent victory on the Democrat shutdown. The Department of Justice has already turned over tens of thousands of pages to the public on Epstein. We are looking at various Democratic operatives, Bill Clinton, Reid Hoffman, Larry Summers, etc., and their relationship to Epstein and the House Oversight Committee can have whatever they are legally entitled to. I don't care. All I do care about is that Republicans get back on point, which is the economy, affordability, where we are winning big. You see what I mean about him saying things that don't stand up to objective reality? At the moment, that's a ridiculous statement in view of the election results of, well, now it's about 2 weeks ago. And the fact that inflation is still here, and I can guarantee you grocery prices are still going up. And if I can see it, by God, everybody can. Because I am one myopic dude. Our victory on reducing inflation from the highest level in history to practically nothing, once again, that's simply not a true statement. That's hyperbole and bourgeois. But it's Donald Trump's style. Sooner or later, this come back to bite him. He could have an accomplishment, a real honest-to-God accomplishment, and by overselling it and exaggerating it and blowing it up all out of proportion, he can negate his own accomplishment in political terms with significant numbers of independent voters. This is the kind of thing that loses elections. Bringing down prices for the American people, again, not true. Delivering historic tax cuts. Now see this one, the big bill, I won't call it beautiful because it wasn't, but the big bill did prevent a tremendous tax hike. The story on this is that President Trump and the Republican Congress under Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell put through a serious tax bill back in 2017. Wish we had their leadership again. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. At any rate, McConnell and Ryan wrote a tax bill, they and their colleagues in the House and Senate, that was primarily responsible for the booming economy that Mr. Trump enjoyed for the most of his first term in office. Now, these tax rates were designed to expire at the end of this year. And what the big bill did, was prevent that from happening. If that had happened, if the Democrats had blocked this, the tax increases as of January 1st would have been, well, let's just say impressive and leave it at that. Certainly enough to have an effect, a deleterious effect on our economy. So when Mr. Trump claims that he delivered historic tax cuts, well, we did. 7 years ago. And what we've just done is to prevent them from going away. What else we got here? Mr. Trump is now reciting a whole laundry list here, some of which stands up to examination. Gaining trillions of dollars investment into America, a record. He's gotten a lot of commitments, and if they follow through, that's a true statement. It would be a record. The rebuilding of our military, that's a work in progress. Securing our border, yes. Deporting criminal illegal aliens, yes. Ending men and women's sports, yes. Stopping transgender for everyone, and so much more. Nobody cared about Jeffrey Epstein when he was alive, and if the Democrats had anything, they would have released it before our landslide election victory, which was not a landslide by any means. Some members of the Republican Party are being used. We can't let that happen. Let's start talking about the Republican Party's record-setting achievements and not fall into the Epstein trap, which is actually a curse on the Democrats, not us. Make America great again. Well, Mr. Trump here, most of this is a recitation of his laundry list of accomplishments, some of which hold water, some of which doesn't. But the overall import of this is that he is now calling on House Republicans to vote to release the Epstein files, whereas he had been calling for them not to do so. There is nothing here about him shifting field, but the simple fact of the matter is he has. Well, next question. How do I feel about that? I'm relieved. I'm glad Mr. Trump went from a wrong position to a right position. Good for him. Good for him. Because to be placed in to take a position that makes it look like you are standing between the American people and something that they might want to know, that's not a good place to be. That's where Nixon put himself, and look what happened to him. The proper model to follow is the Reagan model. When Iran-Contra erupted and people were crying for his head on a pike, what did Reagan do? Open everything up. Release every document. Answer every question. Hide nothing. And by giving this performance of absolute transparency, no matter where the bodies were buried, Reagan was able to retain public confidence through a crisis that would have destroyed most American politicians. I don't know what made Mr. Trump change his mind on this and decide that he would urge his fellow Republicans to vote for transparency. But whatever it was, maybe it was one of his family members, maybe it was some advisor, maybe he just worked it out for himself. Maybe somebody whispered, "Do it Reagan's way," in his ear. And he decided, hey, that guy was pretty popular, wasn't he? He really did win landslide elections. Again, speculation about why the president has changed his tune on this really doesn't appeal to me. The question of why is really irrelevant. The point is he evidently has, and he has moved from a poor position to a good position. And he's to be applauded for that. Indeed, I'm surprised he had taken a very strong position on this. And, any Republican who votes to release these files is on my excrement list. Well, he shifted ground, just like that. One of the things you have to be able to do in politics is to move fast. And by golly, this was a very fast move on the president's part. Nice going, Mr. President. Well done, Mr. President. What else we got here today? It seems like there's always an election going on somewhere. The first round of elections for a new president of Chile have just taken place. Chile is an interesting case. Their electoral system, you have a first round and then a runoff. In the first round, you often have a number of candidates competing. Whoop, we've got a call coming in. It's from Phil. Find out what's on his mind today.
Phil from Sarasota calling about the flip-flop of the president.
And what do you think of it? Hello, Phil. Do you hear me?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Thank you. Yes, as far as the timing of the reversal of Trump on the Epstein, I can tell you when it happened because I had a CBS affiliate on last night, not your old competitor, but somewhere else. And it was between, the news came in at the, in Eastern time, it was the 9 o'clock hour. So that would be 6 p.m. Pacific time. And
right.
In the prior news, he was still saying not to release the files.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's exactly when it happened. Somewhere in that hour.
Okay. So when Mr. Trump claims that he was urging people to release these documents last Friday, he's not being honest. He's not telling the truth. I wonder why.
Either that or the media aren't doing their job.
Well, this is Mr. Trump's own Truth Social post, so it's not, something that is being misquoted. He's simply saying something that doesn't stand up. Why bother to do that? Instead of claiming that he had this position 3 days ago, which he didn't, why mention it at all? Just say, I'm urging all my fellow Republicans to blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I don't know. And the other thing I wanted to comment was he needs to take more credit for removing the tax on Social Security, because when tax time comes, those of us who are on it will find their tax bill greatly reduced. Because remember, it was Clinton, I believe, who imposed the tax. Is really double taxation on Social Security.
That's
you're
right.
Taxed before and then you're taxed again. So he's relieved the pressure on that, and that's an achievement.
That is a very, very cogent point. And you're right. Mr. Trump doesn't talk about that too often, and it's a big deal. I agree with you.
Yeah, he really doesn't do a good job of supporting himself. He blusters too much about things that are wrong or irrelevant, and doesn't raise issues like that one that are important to people.
Got a great idea, Phil.
A bad PR man. He's a bad PR man for himself.
Got a great idea for you, Phil. Why don't you and Roz go up to Washington and you offer your services to the president as a consultant, supplementary retirement income? I'm sure they'd pay you something. Maybe you'd be able to live in a little room off the new White House ballroom. Might be a good deal.
Yeah, I worked for, many years ago, I worked for a mayor who had a similar personality, and it was not pleasant, without going into detail. Yeah, when you deal with somebody who shoots from the hip, is mercurial, is visceral, you never know what to expect, and it's very stressful.
One of these days, you're going to have to tell some stories.
Well, I can tell you privately. I'm not sure I want to discuss it on the air.
Fair enough. Okay.
But it's a good story.
I respect that, and that gives me something to look forward to. Well, thank you so much for calling and clearing up the question of just when did the president change his mind about this. That explains why this morning's newspaper still has the old story, because by 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern time, the Wall Street Journal is published out of New York. The paper had gone to bed and was already made up.
Exactly.
And at the time the paper was set and printed, its news columns were accurate. But between that time and this morning, when I switched on my computer, the president had done a 180. And again, thank you for putting your pinpoint time on it.
Yep, and you and I are old enough to remember when newspapers actually published various editions as the news changed throughout the day, and those days are long gone.
Yeah, you'd have a morning edition, an afternoon, and an evening edition of the same newspaper.
That's right, at least. All right, well, I got to go.
Okay, well, very valuable information. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Best to Roz.
You too, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's the story, thanks to one of our perspicacious listeners who took the time to call and clear this up for us. It seems that sometime yesterday evening, let me see. So the president's in the Eastern time zone, so he said he heard this on the 9 o'clock news on the East Coast. So sometime around that hour, the president decided that his opposition to the release of the Epstein documents was not a good position to be in, and he changed it. And it's kind of funny, almost Orwellian. Not only did he change it, but according to him, that had always been his position. No, I haven't changed. I've always felt this way. No, Mr. President, You did a flip-flop. We all saw it. And by denying it, you just make yourself look like a lying politician. One of the biggest attractions you've had, I've listened to it many times from and bedazzled Trump fans. He's not a politician. We love him because he's not a politician. Well, here's a chance to set yourself aside from the rest of these mere mortals. Let them be the ones who claim, oh, I always thought that. I haven't changed. Yes, you have. And there's no need to go into a big, I came to a judgment that, I came to the decision that the American people should actually see this. One sentence. No need to go into any big justification or explanation. That's not the kind of thing you do anyway, so that would be unappealing. Don't do it. Don't do it. Simply say, I've changed my mind. I am now urging my fellow Republicans to vote for release of the Epstein files. The American people have a right to know. Enough. But Phil, who is a Trump supporter, shakes his head and says, Mr. Trump does not do himself any favors in situations like this. By pretending that he has not shifted field, when he plainly and obviously has, he makes himself, first of all, he reduces his own credibility. He's trying to tell you something that is obviously not true. And for no reason, there's nothing to be gained. You're going to try to mislead people or dupe people, at least make sure that there's something big at stake. Here, it's nothing. So you reach a new conclusion. End of story. So Mr. Trump went from wrong to right on this. And again, I've made that clear. This is a good idea. It's a good change of position. I'm glad the president made it. But by handling it the way he has, he may have succeeded in at least eliminating or lessening any positive effect it might have had in terms of public opinion. I don't know. I guess time will tell. Frankly, the whole Epstein thing has always bored me. I think long ago we figured out that Epstein and Trump were buddies long ago, which is no surprise. These two guys in the same city, yeah, sure, they're going to know each other. They're probably going to pal around. But a long time ago, Trump disconnected himself from Epstein. Maybe he saw something about Epstein that the rest of us have since come to understand. Frankly, I think that's it. So what do? Do you start honking your horn? No, you just say, I'm out of here. You go your way, I'll go mine. Which is what, evidently, Donald Trump did. And this, once again, this is years before he ever came down the escalator and got into public life. So hopefully the Epstein files will become public and the people who are interested in such things will go oral with them and have all kinds of fun. And I, frankly, will be talking about primarily other matters. It is past. Time for some important messages, which I need to. This will only take a second here. I'm almost ready. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Back in 2 minutes.
Bring happiness into your holiday with a fresh and fragrant Lions Club Christmas tree. When you light up the tree, your family's smile will last into January. Pick up your tree from the Lions Club lot at the Portuguese Hall near Costco. 2 to 7 weekdays, 10 to 7 weekends. While they last. Bring happiness into your holiday with a fresh and fragrant Lions Club Christmas tree. All proceeds go to helping those in need in Santa Cruz.
Opens day after Thanksgiving.
The wife says the boat's got to go, no problem. Stored at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul, easy off Highway 1 by the airport. 24-hour security for cars, boats, and RVs. Stored away at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul and Freedom.
You made the products, now you have to deliver. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul has the moving vans, shipping boxes, and packing materials you need to deliver them. Easy off Highway 1 on Airport Boulevard by the airport. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul in Freedom.
Get hooked up with affordable cannabis at your neighborhood Hook Outlet dispensary. We have locations in Santa Cruz, Capitola, and Watsonville. At each Hook Outlet, you will find unmatched low prices on the Hook's unparalleled selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlets are Santa Cruz County's best source for the finest cannabis at the lowest prices. See for yourself. Stop by any Hook Outlet and say hi. We'll see you there. HookOutlet.com.
Attention content producers. You can have access to a complete digital media production facility at Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Easily rent video and audio equipment, a studio with green screen, editing suite, and audio booth, all at can't say no rates. Schedule a tour to see for yourself at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
At 9:32, we're back. Sorry about that. And the, let me see here. Telephone number, 831-265-5050. Democrats for some time now have been living in a post-Watergate world. Watergate is funny. Even to me, this seems like a while ago. It's been more than 50 years. To many people listening to my broadcast today, people like Evan, Watergate is just an 8-letter word or 9-letter word that they've seen around. What does it mean? They didn't live through it. They have no real intimate touch with it the way those of us who did inevitably do. Basically, we saw a President of the United States, for the first time, thus far the only time in history, forced to resign his office because of malfeasances. Now, Democrats hated, loathed, and despised Richard Nixon. It's interesting when you think about Nixon's politics nowadays. He would have been more in the what do you want to say, the Romney moderate Republican mold. After all, he was a California Republican. He came out of the world of Earl Warren, for God's sake. So Nixon was portrayed by the left as this arch right-winger because, of course, he had unmasked Alger Hiss, who was a communist in a high position in government and really needed to be unmasked. I mean, you've got this Soviet agent higher enough up in the State Department where he's actually shaping policy. Does that make you happy? Well, it made the left happy. And any attempt to actually, ferret this guy out and remove him, can't have that. And the guy who did it must be some kind of an arch right-winger. So that's how Nixon got branded. But the brand never fit comfortably. Then Nixon became president at a time when the streets were flowing with blood. And, you think America's violent today? Try 1968, 1969. And I'm not kidding. Once again, I lived through these years. I can tell you, this we have today is bad enough. What we had then was insane. And right, left, or center, Nixon was a man who believed in the rule of law, public order, and once again, this made him, in the eyes of the left, a hard right reactionary fascist. I don't know what, the idea that, you conduct yourself in a decent manner in public discourse and in public, I guess that's just arch conservative today. I think it's frankly necessary. If you're going to have a society like ours in which millions of people rub elbows every day, if we don't have civility and decency in public conduct, we're all going to die, or at least be severely wounded. Anyway, so Nixon I went into the whole story on Watergate a few weeks ago. I'm not going to tell it all again, but suffice to say, Nixon, due to certain character flaws of his, did things that simply didn't stand the scrutiny of day. And when they came to light over a period of time, Nixon was presently forced to resign his office. So the Democrats had nailed a president of the United States to the wall. They had drawn blood. They had taken a scalp. And they never forgot it. When Iran-Contra came along, they thought that they would be able to pull the same thing with Reagan. But Reagan was a much more competent politician and a much better man than Richard Nixon. Therefore, he didn't make the mistakes Nixon made. And his character didn't lead him to the actions that Nixon undertook that caused his own undoing. Where Nixon handed them to rope to hang him, Reagan did not. He simply wouldn't. And as a result, they came away disappointed. Not only did Reagan leave office popular, but for the first and only time in the post-war era, a political party won a third term in power. I mean, it was a monumental win. That's the kind of win that Reagan used to notch. Monumental wins. Real landslides. Not the kind that Donald Trump amplifies out of his squeakers. But again, the Democrats have this idea that the way to behave when there's a Republican in office is to essentially struggle against him and try to get something on him, try to nail him, try to catch him out in some scandal. Of course, this was impossible with George W. Bush. Bush was not that competent a politician, and he made policy mistakes. But he was a man of impeccable personal character and moral probity. He did not go into nutty real estate deals. He did not, lose money gambling at Vegas and get in over his head. He did not go scampering around with other women. He didn't have affairs with Chinese spies. None of this. So the only thing that could ever pin on him, and it almost cost him the presidency, it turned out that years before he was ever president, years before he was ever in public life, he had had a ticket for driving under the influence. A DUI. Well, how bad was it? Was there an accident? No. Did he hit anybody? Anything? No. Just cop pulled him over. We had one more than you should have. Okay, well, we'll write you a citation. Pay the fine. That was it. And that came out the weekend before the election. I still remember there was this creepy little guy up in Maine. This has happened at the Bush family compound in Maine. They have at this place that they used to stay at. And this little wizened little creep, kind of person that, if you saw him or, you found yourself sitting next to him at a diner, you'd move 3 stools down. And he had gotten into the county records and found this, and he brought it out. I'm gonna cost Bush the election. He almost did. But that was the only kind of scandal you could get on W. Now with Donald Trump, it's a different matter. He's been involved in some, well, we know that he paid off a porn star. I mean, that public record. We know about the Access Hollywood tape and the things he had to say. And so it's no mystery when Holman Jenkins, in writing about this, starts out by saying, I know nothing beyond what's in the press. But I somehow doubt that Donald Trump was among the needy types who relied on Jeffrey Epstein for access to women they wouldn't have had access to otherwise. In other words, did Donald Trump need Jeffrey Epstein to line things up for him? The answer comes back, that shoe does not fit. Interesting and perhaps surprising advice has been flowing from the Democratic Party's loyal handicappers after this month's victories in elections. Don't make impeachment the calling card in next year's congressional midterms. Consistent overbetting on the unpopularity of Mr. Trump has been the reciprocal of every blown opportunity till now. This includes the 2024 presidential race, which was winnable even amid the Democratic Party's world historical malpractices. Unfortunately, this conflicts with activists who insist Democrats show fight with the thankless government shutdown that finally ended this week. Now they want more fight over Epstein. This is a very good point that Jenkins is making here. People who want to fight for the sake of fighting are exhibiting very poor judgment. You fight for the sake of what you can possibly gain from it. The fight itself is, at best, unpleasant. Nobody likes to be throwing punches and getting punched in return. Unless, of course, you're a masochist, in which case you got other problems. Read carefully in a press somewhat chastened by its previous misreporting. You learn a couple of things. Mr. Trump and Mr. Epstein socialized in Palm Beach, but Epstein and his chief accuser, the late Virginia Giuffre, both left clear testimony Mr. Trump never behaved improperly. In one of 3 emails leaked by Democrats to create this week's furor, Epstein says Mr. Trump knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. Some of Mr. Trump's shrillest defenders, this slight hint that Mr. Trump, then a private citizen, might have done more as reason to challenge the subject in prior administration's supposedly sweetheart plea deal with Epstein. They forget the sweetheart nature was a description after the fact by the Miami Herald to slur Donald Trump. The original plea deal may have been weak due to a desire to accommodate his victim's reluctance to testify, but the only sweetheart effort came later when the Office of District Attorney of New York County, Cy Vance Jr., tried to use their non-testimony to reduce Epstein's sex offender designation, which is exactly the risk Democrats now court. House Republicans answered this week's selective Democratic release was a deluge of files that tell us nothing new about Mr. Trump, but show Democrats like Larry Summers, former Obama White House lawyer Catherine Rummler, carrying on with Epstein long after his crimes were known. Down this road lies an obvious risk for the left. Bill Clinton and friends, who were the real power elite that Epstein sought to cultivate in his criminal heyday. Now, at this point, Holman Jenkins does something that, well, I really love, but I really hate. What do I mean? He comes up with a point that is beautiful and obvious enough to where I'm ashamed of not having thought of it myself. There is a flash of insight here that is really, really big. And it's like I was standing so close to it that I couldn't see it. To return to Mr. Trump's history of womanizing, I erred in 2016 in believing his personal baggage would make him a risky nominee. In office, he would be trammeled like no president in history by attacks on his businesses and his history of financial and personal scandals. Wrong. All this disappeared from the public discourse in favor of something else. A made-up story about Russia. In essence, listen to this carefully. Democrats immunized him from his own past by accusing him of the one thing of which he was innocent. A great enigma of political psychology. The place to look might be the psyche of Rachel Maddow. For reasons Freud might fathom, Maddow was the left's most ardent promoter of the distraction that removed from Mr. Trump the weight of 35 years of tabloid infamy. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. And I did not see it. I didn't tell it to you. It took Holman Jenkins to come up with that. How many times have you heard me say, well, without President Clinton, there could never have been a President Trump? And with President Clinton, the things he was accused of, the serial womanizing, the abuse of women in a position of inferior positions. After all, he was the governor of the state. Who were they? Minor people that Mr. Clinton would use for his gratification. This man was a user and a liar. And we knew it in 1992. The Democrats nominated him anyway, and the people elected him anyway. A huge step down the road to perdition. Again, a person with Donald Trump's background could never have been considered for the office before Bill Clinton broke down all those barriers. And indeed defeated an attempted impeachment by convincing people, hey, this is just my personal life, my lies, my infidelities to my wife. It's all between us. It has nothing to do with running the nation's business, which, when you look at it, is true. How far do you want to take that, though? I mean, Abraham Lincoln was our most capable, competent, best president we ever had. What if he had also been a serial killer? We're going to say, well, every once in a while, old Abe likes to go out and hack somebody's head off and bury the remains of them in the woods, but look at the job he does. His career as a serial killer has nothing to do with his ability to lead this country through the Civil War, end slavery, and all the other. It's basically the same argument, presented with extreme examples, but it's the same argument. There was a reason why historically Americans looked for personal character in their presidents, as well as competence. Indeed, sometimes personal character became a selling point. Want an example? I'll give you a fairly recent one, President Jimmy Carter. We look back on Mr. Carter's administration today, it's basically judged to be a failure. Mr. Carter was thrown out of office in an electoral landslide after one term. But to this day, even Mr. Carter's strongest critics, people like me, admire and respect him for his personal character. Mr. Carter campaigned saying to the American people, I will never lie to you. And frankly, I can't think of a single time when he ever did. I guess he's kind of the anti-Clinton. But in terms of being an honorable man and a decent human being, Jimmy Carter is far, far superior to Bill Clinton, who falls remarkably short in this aspect. But again, with getting back to Trump's case here, perhaps I've just answered my own question. Think about it for a moment. Holman Jenkins points out that Trump carried all of this baggage. And he said, I thought that he couldn't be elected president because of all of this. So the Democrats came up with the Russia hoax, and essentially they accused Mr. Trump of something that he hadn't done, but they had the entire security and intelligence apparatus of the federal government weaponized to create and push the narrative. I said, who was it who once said, you don't want to irritate the American security apparatus. They have 7 ways to get you. But the question Jenkins is asking here is, why did the Democrats immunize Trump from his own past by accusing him of the one thing in which he could be found innocent? Well, perhaps they saw what I've just talked about. Maybe I've got half the truth here, and he has the other half. Many times over a period of years, my listeners have heard me say that Donald Trump could never have become elected president if it weren't for Bill Clinton and his failings and his lack of decency and behavior. This is what enabled Mr. Trump to run for president. Okay, Holman Jenkins, there's your answer. Democratic political operatives were just as aware of that as I am. They looked at it and they said, Bill Clinton got elected after the way he acted. So can Donald Trump. So how are we going to stop him? Well, once again, the lessons of Watergate. In the case of Watergate, the President Nixon had actually ordered the CIA to quash an FBI investigation on grounds of national security. There was no national security involved. It was simply Nixon covering the tracks of the people who'd been operating in his behalf. That's a criminal offense. That's obstruction of justice right there on the face of it. Impeachable offense? Hell yes. Here we're not talking about mishandling women or doing something else that we don't care about. Let him have all the girls in Washington, D.C. Let him have the boys, too. We don't care. It's just his job that we care. Well, when you're committing obstructions of justice, that's your job. If you're a buddy of the president of Russia, that's your job. So, Mr. Holman Jenkins, the answer to your question, you ask, why did the Democrats accuse him of something of which he was innocent instead of all this other stuff? The answer is the other stuff wouldn't work. Mr. Clinton had already proven that. And so in order to disqualify Mr. Trump, or anyone for that matter, from the presidency, you have to accuse them of something that amounts to a malfeasance that actually affects the job they do. And paying off porn stars doesn't meet that bill. Being in the pocket of Vladimir Putin does meet that bill. The problem, of course, being that Donald Trump was guilty of one, but not of the other. And here is where the weaponization of the American intelligence and security network comes in. It now appears, and we have the documentation of this, that shortly after Donald Trump's first election, meeting was held in the White House, including then President Barack Obama, Clapper, Brennan, the usual suspects. And CIA had been asked to report on this. Is there any? They came back and said, no, there's nothing here. And President Obama said, oh yeah, make something. That's an order. And at this point, if you want dirt on somebody, where do you go? You go to their worst enemy, right? So they went to the Hillary Clinton campaign, came up with a Steele dossier, which by CIA standards was garbage. But in order to accomplish the desired goal, they accepted it and constructed narratives to verify it, and then used it to defraud FISA court judges into granting warrants for domestic surveillance. I mean, from this, talk about fruit of the poison tree. This is a banyan tree with poison fruit on every limb. And it has taken 10 years for the truth to finally come out. This is one of the reasons why the work of the House Oversight Committee is important, and why it will be too bad in next year. At this point, it looks like Republicans will lose control of the House, and if they do, all of that goes away. And instead, the House spends all of its time impeaching President Trump. This is why it is absolutely imperative that during the next few months, Republicans get their act together and Mr. Trump stop making unforced errors. Don't lay landmines in front of yourself. Don't put up ropes that you will then trip over. I mean, it's bad enough to have the Democrats out there trying to make you look foolish every day. When you do it to yourself, you merely facilitate their efforts. It already cost the Republican Party control of Congress back in 2018. It already cost Mr. Trump re-election in 2020. So this is an established story. But that's the politics of it. The practicality of it, and I'm grateful to Holman Jenkins for providing the other half of this equation. He asks, why would the Democrats immunize President Trump from his own past, his real past, by accusing him of the one thing of which he could be found innocent? I believe we've answered that question here. It was because the people making these decisions understood the history that I've described. Oh, I don't flatter myself to think that they listen to my program. I mean, just, if I figured out something, somebody else can too, right? So they had seen that stories of womanizing and serial dalliances, etc., infidelities. If the candidate were sufficiently charismatic, and certainly both Bill Clinton and Donald Trump can be described by the word charismatic, people won't care. Not anymore. That's so 20th century. And even by the end of the 20th century, people were just, hey, he plays the saxophone, let's vote for him. But when they accused him of something that he actually was innocent of, they weren't able to get him out of office, but they sure did short-circuit things for a while. It's 10 o'clock. I'll be back in 6 minutes. Stick around. Okay. Do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do. My God. Oops.
Annie Taylor bought herself a trailer and headed for the Golden State. She had confidence she could work for defense. To help to beat the sappy jappies would be great. So she parked her trailer near a shipyard. She asked them for employment, so they made her climb a mast. A seagull landed on her head and she came down but fast. Then she towed her trailer to an air plant. She climbed into a plane and by mistake she turned the switch, and she landed with her tail up in a ditch. So she pulled her trailer to the Navy Yard. She met a gob of gobs there who were guarding all the gates. They said, we'd love to have you, but we can't have female mates. So she parked her trailer near an army camp. She walked up to the general and said, Private, you're so cute. Now she's got an imprint of the general's boot. Then she towed her trailer to a roundhouse. She got a job as fireman, but she got up too much steam. The boiler blew and out she flew and bounced back on the beam. So she towed her trailer down the highway. A traffic cop arrested her because she took a drink. So they parked her little trailer in the clink.
Let's turn that over, shall we?
Private Jackson had a girl he fondly called Bo Peep. Now Jackson didn't have a car, so drove by in a Jeep. They took a ride, the time flew by, and Jackson was in heaven. Still Jackson cried, Bo Peep, my Jeep's gotta be in camp by 11. So little Bo Peep has lost her Jeep and don't know where to find it. Her soldier boy took it back to camp and left Bo Peep behind it. It didn't have doors, the seats were hard, but Bo Peep never minded. It didn't ride like a Cadillac, she wondered who designed it. Roller coasters nearly killed her, aeroplanes, they never thrilled her. But with Jackson at the wheel, she got that Jeep feel. Now little Bo Peep wants to find her Jeep and find her soldier chappie. If he comes chug-chuggy in his old Blitz buggy, Bo Peep will be happy. Little Bo Peep has lost her Jeep, her boyfriend made an error. He let her drive, goodness sakes alive, that Bo Peep, she's a terror. With throttle pushed down, she tore through town, the red lights didn't stop her. The soldier knew that they both were through when she sideswiped a copper. Now little Bo Peep, she's lost her Jeep. Oh my, why must her joy end? Now her little Jeep is laying in a heap, and the guardhouse has her boyfriend.
Wartime tunes. Not bad, not bad. Okay, let's get back to All right. Time for hour number 2 to begin, 10:06. That is the change. The thing that remains the same, of course, is the telephone number, 831-265-5050. To get you through, we've already had our first call, but you could be our second one. Be number 2. Try harder. Number 2, try harder. You know, to people of my generation, that means something. It was based on an advertising campaign for Avis Rent-A-Car Company. Now, at that time, Avis was a challenger to Hertz Rent-A-Car, which was the biggest company in the business. So Avis was number 2. So why should they, why should you go and do business with them? We said, we're number 2, but we try harder. And this was a slogan that was widely publicized. Obviously, there was an entire advertising campaign, radio and television spots, magazine, newspaper ads. If they had online at that time, I'm sure it was there. And it became part of the popular culture. These things come and go with generations. Nowadays, you'd have to go a long way to find somebody who would catch on or nod their head when you say, I know, old gold. Well, what's old gold? They don't even sell them anymore, for gosh sakes. But there was a time when jokes based on that phrase got a laugh. And for me, they still do. The time is 10:08 at SantaCruzVoice.com. I'm Charles Freedman. Let's bring up the call screen in case somebody calls, and we'll find out about that right away. Let us move on to another topic. My paper guy occasionally brings me the Santa Cruz Sentinel, and it's interesting when he does because this is the one time the Wall Street Journal has its own news sources and its own reporters. The San Francisco Chronicle generally does its own reporting. But when I pick up the Santa Cruz Sentinel, they, like many other newspapers, as a matter of fact, probably the overwhelming majority of newspapers around the country, they use the Associated Press for their news. When I've worked in radio, we had a teletype machine, the AP teletype, and when you wanted a newscast, you walked out to the teletype, pulled off the copy you wanted, went in and read it, and that was how you got your news, your world and national news. For local, you'd have your own reporters. But the importance of this is that occasionally when I look at the Sentinel, I see AP stories, Associated Press stories. Now, the AP is a wire service. As I say, it's just literally everywhere. And it's kind of like in Britain, the British Broadcasting Corporation, you depend on it for news, for real news. And the BBC has recently been embarrassed by a revelation that it's anything but that. The Associated Press is also a left-wing organ, as is thoroughly demonstrated by the fact, I'm looking at the front page of the Santa Cruz Sentinel, Trump finds he can't fix inflation. President Trump's problems with fixing the high cost of living, giving voters a feeling of deja vu. Now, this is a defensible argument, but it is an argument. And as such, it is perfectly appropriate for the newspaper to print this, but not on the front page. This piece belongs in the opinion pages, along with the letters to the editor and other such editorial pieces as the paper cares to print on that particular day. This is not news. It is opinion and analysis. And this is the biggest gripe that those of us who have been media critics for most of our lives have, is a continual presentation of opinion and argument as news, as hard news. Trump finds he can't fix inflation. Does that sound like a fact to you? The President of the United States cannot fix inflation. Well, that's obviously not a fact. The President can definitely do things. So what we have here is an argument about Mr. Trump's policies, whether they're effective or not, and so on. Again, all of this is perfectly legitimate as a matter of opinion and argument and belongs on the editorial pages. But the Santa Cruz Sentinel, I'm sure, is not alone. It would be interesting to know how many hundreds of newspapers on, what was that, Saturday? On Saturday, had that headline. Now, the fact of the matter is, I have been honking the horn on this program for some time for Mr. Trump to do something about this biggest single issue that we face. And I was very upset when the day after the election, Mr. Trump was poo-pooing affordability. That's I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about all the wonderful things my administration has done. And then he immediately realized that wouldn't do, so he switched to saying, what do you mean affordability? Prices are down. Inflation is down. We fixed that problem. Ouch. One of Joe Biden's biggest problems in terms of public support. Do you remember when the whole theme of he and his administration was Bidenomics has worked or is working? Oh, this inflation that we're seeing, this is just transitory. Here and gone. Don't worry about it. No, nothing to see here, folks. That was what Mr. Biden and his people were hawking 3 years ago. It lost them 2 national elections in a row. Albeit, in both cases, those losses were narrower than they should have been. The 2022 off-year election should have been a red wave. It wound up being a ripple. And Donald Trump, although he touts a landslide victory, he beat Kamala Harris by 1.5 points in the popular vote and did not get to 50%. If that's a landslide, I'm Yehudi. But given the performance of Biden in office and the ineptitude of Kamala Harris as a candidate, should have been a landslide. Should have been 10 points and 400 electoral votes. That incidentally constitutes a landslide. Or at the very least, it should have been a comfortable win with the Republican for the first time since 2004, actually scoring a majority of the popular vote. Didn't happen. Now, the latest election results were just 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks tomorrow, and they were a disaster for the Republican Party. In blue states, in purple states, even in some red states, Republican candidates lost and lost and lost. A repetition of that type of performance 1 year from now would constitute how big a disaster? Well, first of all, a disaster for the Republican Party, obviously, losing control of the House of Representatives, possibly even the Senate. President Trump would be reduced to governing by the same way Obama did. Hey, I've got a pen and a cell phone. I could govern. Remember when Obama said that? The screams of anguish on this program were deafening. This isn't constitutional. This isn't the way our republic is supposed to operate. The president doesn't have a cell phone and a pen so he can govern. That's not the way it works. And if you think I'm going to be any happier about it with Trump acting that way than I was with Obama acting that way, then you better change your brand. Because I am not in the mood to put up with extra constitutional foolishness. I just don't expect it as much from the conservative side. But if it happens to come from the conservative side, it will be called out on this program. Bet on it. So what should Mr. Trump do? Well, it's the economy, stupid, in the immortal words of James Carville. And there are things that could be done. Mr. Trump can, first of all, roll back this tariff nonsense on allied countries. I mean, if he wants to continue to use tariffs to punish countries like China and Russia, fine. And I'm sure that Congress will be happy to cooperate in passing punitive trade measures against those countries should we need it. But the idea of imposing tariffs on countries that are solid allies of the United States, just because Mr. Trump is upset about an issue of reciprocity, negotiate it. Mr. Trump's a deal maker. Okay, make deals. Do your job. What else can be done? Mr. Trump should be in the business of working with the Congress right now on another reconciliation bill. And really, it can't come too soon. An opportunity was missed last year when many of the pro-growth measures that could have gotten this economy, well, humming. What's humming mean? How about one more point of GDP growth? Instead of the economy growing by 2%, an economy growing by 3%. That doesn't sound like a huge difference, does it? But on the ground, in the communities where people live, that extra 1%, bear in mind we're talking about a $38 trillion economy. 1% of that, let me see. 1% would be 3.8, 10% would be 3.8 trillion. 1% is 380 billion. A huge amount of money. These are the things that could conceivably get the economy going again in time for the next election. And above all, we need to see prices actually stabilize and hopefully drop. Again, ahead of the next election. Far enough ahead of the next election so people can actually see it and notice it. Now, frankly, it seems to me that the calendar for that is already critical. Generally speaking, for something like that, a change in prices or a change in the direction of prices, this takes time to sink in. First, it has to be accomplished, which is no mean thing given the size of the American economy, and then people have to actually perceive it and appreciate it. This is why the time when Mr. Trump should have begun focusing on these economic issues was immediately upon taking office. Instead, Mr. Trump, and we all remember this, he exploded in every direction. This was a criticism, incidentally, that was levied at the time against Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter became president, he was in his 50s, I think. He was vigorous. He was young. He was very bright, quite intelligent. And he immediately set about taking action here, 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 and here. Successful presidents generally focus on one or two things they want to get done right off the bat. With Reagan, it was tax cuts and budget cuts. And a generous increase in the military budget. Mr. Hegseth, the defense secretary, is calling for larger military spending. This would have a stimulating effect upon the economy. The problem is that the money we could use for that is instead being spent on interest on the national debt. And that is the biggest single problem the country faces. Our national debt has now gotten large enough to where interest on the debt is imposing a serious burden on our public finances. I keep shining a light on this. I keep hoping that somebody somewhere might notice. And I realize that it is a forlorn hope. Because politicians who take this approach, who say, hey, we've got this debt problem now and we've got to do something about it, the American public are not interested in hearing about that. There was a time when you could talk about fiscal responsibility and get votes. This is something that people would support. Today, they won't. The New Deal has finally become part of the American political DNA. John F. Kennedy's immortal words, ask not what your country can do for you, ask instead what you can do for your country. Possibly his most famous quotation. Nowadays, most people are just interested in what their country can do for them. Where is my check? And what is Mr. Trump doing? Oh, I'm going to use my tariff revenue. I'll send a $2,000 check to everybody. I'll use my tariff money to buy your vote. Ouch. This isn't the kind of thing a Republican does. If a Republican gets extra money in the till, what's he do? He says, okay, great, now we can pay down some of this debt. We can pay down some of the principal, reduce the interest. That's what a Republican does when they have extra money. They pay down debt. They climb out of the hole, or at least try to. The last politician we had who had a serious proposal for climbing out of the hole was House Speaker Paul Ryan. He's out of public life. Driven from public life, not just by the Democrats, who accused him of pushing Granny over the cliff in a wheelchair and all kinds of other inhuman things, but by his fellow Republicans. The Trump MAGA people, they had no use for Paul Ryan. Why? Because he was too serious about real policy. He wanted to do what they really, in this, who's the better politician? Not Paul Ryan. Donald Trump and his people are the better politicians in this regard. Instead of telling the American people what they need to hear and losing, Donald Trump tells the American people what they want to hear. And 2 out of 3 times, by the skin of his teeth, he managed to win. It's interesting. Mr. Trump has run for president 3 times. 2 out of those 3 times, more people voted against him than for him. For a president to attempt to make such radical changes in the direction of government on such a very narrow margin of public approval. This is the same kind of thing that Barack Obama did with Obamacare. And of course, today, 10 years after the fact, Obamacare is now, the wheels are coming off. The warnings that Republicans made 10 years ago, this thing won't work, it is not affordable, this will explode premiums and erode the quality of care, all of that was overwhelmed by Mr. Obama's, hey, you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. You like your plan, you can keep your plan, all of which turned out to be lies. Add to those lies the lies about affordability. American people put into office a leader in a political party who were intent on exerting power and control. And the amount of power and control the federal government has over the healthcare system is now permanently enlarged. Can't you cut it back? Can't you do away with it? How? When we did Prohibition, Constitutional Amendment, 18th Amendment, no booze. In the next dozen years, we found out that was, alcohol had been a problem. That's why we'd gotten rid of it. Public drunkenness and the problems it causes, the fights that break out, the people who get hurt, murdered. The lost productivity. The man hours squandered on hangovers. So let's come along and do away with this. We'll move toward perfect. This was a utopian idea. One more. Oh, we can make things perfect. All we have to do is this. Nobody ever stopped to think that the consequences of moving the other way might be even worse. And it took us a dozen years to figure that out. So we had repeal. But by the time repeal came, did we put things back the way they had been? No. Because simply by being enforced for that period of time, Prohibition had wrought permanent changes, irreversible changes. The most important one, of course, being the development of truly organized crime with huge revenue streams. That didn't go away when Prohibition ended. It simply went into new lines of business, shall we say. So public policy errors, we remember what FDR said during the Depression. He's saying, well, we'll just try something, and if it doesn't turn out to be a good idea, we'll try something else. That's a very logical and reasonable argument, isn't it? The problem is that when you try something in public policy, you change the equation. This is why the default position on any public policy proposal should always, always, always be no. No! And the burden of proof is then placed on the proponents of that change in public policy. Show us that this is a change for the better. Show us that you've actually done some looking into this, that you made a serious effort to figure out not only what the benefits will be, but also what liabilities. And don't try to tell us, oh, this policy has no liabilities. Everything has liabilities. There's a downside to everything. The question is the upside good enough to make it worth the downside? And that's a question that can be answered. And sometimes the answer is yes. So sometimes a change in public policy is warranted. But since the New Deal era, that hasn't been the narrative, particularly not for the Democrats. The worst time of all was the mid-'60s under Lyndon Johnson, when any crackpot scheme put up by the far left would be sponsored by the president and larruped through a 2-to-1 Democratic Congress. Much of that nonsense still stains our Federal Register to this day. Programs that have been spending money ever since, trillions of dollars wasted. We're going to fight a war on poverty. At the time the war on poverty was announced, the poverty rate in this country was about 15%. And it had been falling. After the war on poverty came in, it quit falling. Didn't rise. It did not rise. Today, the poverty rate is still about 14-15% nationally. After all those millions of dollars, billions, trillions were spent to eradicate poverty, there's still poor people. We'd have fought World War II that way. We'd all be speaking Japanese now. But there are people in the country who want to feel good about it, so they want to throw money at something even if it doesn't help. In the name of compassion. And there are people who will see any public policy initiative undertaken if it just says, oh, this is going to help someone. Who's it going to harm? And are we talking about the same person? It might help them in one way and harm them in another far more serious way. None of this is ever examined. It's just, oh boy, we got to do this. And then, like with Obamacare, 10 years later, you look at the smoking wreckage and say, oh, gee whiz. Let's put it back the way it was. But all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put that mess back together again. We now face a new reality. A worse reality than we faced 12 years ago. We've made the situation worse instead of better. Time is 10:34. Let's grab a couple of minutes worth of advertisements here, and then we'll be back with our next phone call.
Hi, Warren.
Hi, John. What's been going on?
I'm a little upset right now. My roof leaks.
Your roof leaks?
I think water belongs on the ground, rivers or oceans, not in my living room. What do you think I should do?
Well, that's a no-brainer, Joan. Call us here at Knox Roofing.
And how do I call you?
Knox Roofing at 461-0634, or just throw a rock. You're liable to hit one of our trucks on the road. You know, we were voted best roofer in the county again for another year. Thanks, folks, for quality roofing for all these years at prices and financing you can't beat. Ask us about military and senior bonuses, and, of course, what's a Knox box.
I guess I'll just have to call you guys. It sounds like Knox Roofing is well worth it.
Okay, Joan, relax and have fun this summer.
That's 461-0634 for Knox Roofing in Monterey and Santa Cruz County.
Thanks, folks.
Satisfy your hunger with a fresh, prepared, twice-daily grab-and-go sushi you'll find waiting for you at Sushi Market Sprouts, 2 blocks from the beach at 300 7th Avenue in Santa Cruz. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
Hello, I'm Junko, and I look forward to serving you at the Sushi Market Sprouts.
Satisfy your hunger right now with the delicious ramen and sushi you'll find waiting for you at Kaito, easy in-and-out location in the Capitola Mall food court. Special orders welcome. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
This is Koji. I'm looking forward to seeing you at my restaurant, Kaito.
Treehouse dispenses not only the finest cannabis products, but information to those who want to know how to use cannabis for maximum benefit. Hello, I'm Jenna. If you would like to know how best to use cannabis, ask your friends and neighbors at Treehouse Dispensary, 3651 Soquel Drive. If you're 21 plus with a valid ID, no appointment is necessary and the information is free. Order online at ourtreehouse.io and pick up at our drive-thru. See you soon.
Okay, we are back. The time is 10:36. Evan is on the line. Let's go ahead and bring his call along and hear what he has to say on this lovely Monday morning.
Hey, thanks there, Charles. Did we hear Florida Phil last hour? Did we?
Yes. Yes.
Was that Florida? Yeah, that's what I thought. So good to hear Florida Phil as always. Great to hear what his thoughts are. You know what was burning my ears today? You were talking about the federal budget and the breakdown. Granted, I'm not going to argue with you. The interest is, what, at 15% of the total budget. I'm kind of on the realms of a socialist, so I might argue with you a little bit. But 20% of Social Security, Medicare is at 14%. I want to kind of get your thoughts on, we have that defense bill that just keeps going up and up. You agree with that? I probably don't. What's your thoughts on us as a nation start voting on the defense bill and the foreign aid packages that just keep going out?
We do that when we elect members of Congress. Under our constitutional republic, we don't have national referendums. We don't, the founding fathers were justifiably fearful and reticent about direct democracy. The idea of having, a bunch of people who just, came in from the football game and are half tanked making serious decisions of that nature. That's why we have a Congress. And this is the way business is done in our republic. Getting back to your major issue, though, your question about the budget. Well, so far as the defense budget is concerned, in 1980, Ronald Reagan called for an increase in our defense budget, not because he wanted to spend money on guns, bombs, and warplanes, but because of the moves being undertaken by the Soviets in Afghanistan and in Europe and in other places, and the need to counter them. President Carter was the one who initially said we should station intermediate range missiles in Europe to counter the Soviet initiative. They were the ones who did it first. And what we were doing was simply a reaction to that. President Reagan supported that policy of Mr. Carter's. He was the one who actually brought it into fruition. But the first thing he did was he went to the Soviets at that time and he said, hey, how about we do a zero option? Zero option? What do you mean? He says, well, you want us to not deploy these intermediate range missiles. Yes, that's right. Well, why don't you withdraw yours and we'll both drop the idea completely and not bother? That's a zero option. The Russians told him to go to hell. And so President Reagan followed through on Mr. Carter's policy to position those missiles. It's interesting that a few years later, when Soviet leadership changed and Mr. Gorbachev came in, Reagan again proposed the zero option, and Gorbachev was glad to accept it. Well, at the moment, we have Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi to deal with. And at this time, a person who comes along and says we need to reduce the defense budget, I think, can be accused of not paying attention to world realities. The defense budget is a function of the real insecurities in the world and the real need to defend American interests throughout the world. And American interests are worldwide. The idea that we can simply say, okay, well, until they attack us, until they bomb Florida, we don't care. That's just, I've never heard you say that, and I certainly don't think you think that way. There may be some people somewhere who think that way. If so, they're irrational. Now, I'd be interested in hearing what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I just find the real world things that we need to look at. United States has formal alliances or treaty-based commitments with about 72 countries worldwide. So I find we're we got a big defense team, so I don't find we need to keep spending so much of our military spending.
I'm sorry, I disagree.
Just like,
Bear
for
in mind,
example, yeah, no, I understand
well,
that.
you made the
And,
point that we
and I
have.
called
You made the point that we're in
Friday,
alliance. You made the point that we have 72 allied nations. Most of those nations are much smaller than we are, and you get into an alliance with a country like the Philippines, for example, and they are very important, very valuable for regional security, and they provide support and bases for American military forces. But the Filipino Navy is a weak reed to lean on. It is the United States Navy on which Western security rests. And I don't know, you may think, well, isn't that kind of unfair? It's not a matter of whether it's unfair. It is real. It is just why in the 19th century, the British government imposed a fairly heavy tax burden on their citizens in order to fund the Royal Navy, because the British had a worldwide interest. Theirs was their colonial empire. Ours is not that. We don't have a colonial empire, but we do have interests that extend worldwide. These are commercial interests, they're trading interests, the components that we need, the raw materials that we need to produce the things that make our lives possible come from various places. And when somebody like Xi Jinping,
well, God, I apologize for interrupting. I was gonna my Friday call, but I guess not. I'm gonna end this with you and say thank you so much for the call today, and you have a great rest of your Monday show, sir.
Okay, appreciate the call very much. Have yourself a good day. I don't know. I hear these voices. They say, well, we don't need to spend this money on defense. Hey, when we didn't need to, we didn't. After the fall of the Soviet Union, when our international concerns lessened and we weren't facing the threats we were, we reduced our defense budget. In 1938 or 39, somebody who came along and said we need to reduce the defense budget would have been, well, hey, there were such people, weren't there? Okay, let's get along with Mark and find out what's on his mind today. Hello, sir, and thank you for calling. Happy Monday.
Thank you, Charlie. There's a saying that goes, those who beat their swords into plowshares will plow for those who don't.
That's a nice little saw on something, an old saying.
You were talking earlier about government programs and the funding and how they seem to get started and never go away. This affects us locally. Watsonville Community Hospital, it's our hospital here down South County. It's gone through several financial issues, near bankruptcy. Well, it's in trouble again. And I was looking at the financial for the hospital, and 75% of the patients, the folks going there, their care is funded through some sort of a government program. So 75%. So I broke down the government programs. 25% are funded through Medicare. And, that's fine. The people are paying their Part B, their Part A is covered. Then they're also paying their supplemental. So the hospital's getting money out of the Medicare program. 50% is Medi-Cal. That's the California Medicaid. That one they do not get reimbursed on much. It runs about 25% of the cost, if that. So our governor last year said anyone here illegally in the country is eligible for Medi-Cal. Well, what could go wrong? I think it's gone wrong for about $8 billion of the state budget. But again, the local hospitals are getting hammered because the Medi-Cal is not covering the cost of service. So I think here's a local example of government largesse thinking that they are going to do good, and here's what's happening. And it's going to affect us if our local hospital shuts down. I mean, it's where we go when we have an emergency.
Ah, my God. I'm just sitting here thinking, there's one hospital in South County, that's Watsonville Hospital, and it is bankrupt right now. And of course, I guess to a significant number of people on the left, they just don't care. They don't think hospitals should make a profit. Maybe they don't think the hospitals should even meet their costs. They should be operated as charitable enterprises or something. I mean, the idea of health care that doesn't cost anything, well, obviously, buildings cost something, the upkeep on the buildings and the utilities cost something, the staff, the nurses, the cleaning staff, the doctors, the medical equipment, all these cost something. But you hear people calling for free medical care. Does that make any damn sense to you?
Well, the irony here in California, the major cost of our medical care is medical malpractice insurance. And it's because of the philosophy of California. This is a horrific burden on the local medical care. That's why we don't have a trauma center in Santa Cruz County. They'll fly you over the hill to Stanford because we can't afford the medical insurance to cover a trauma center here because it's just prohibitive.
So you're calling for tort reform.
Well, I think on the left, they think that this legal action by the common folk is a good thing. But no, it has cost, and what it's costing us is our medical care. But I hope people look, if Gavin Newsom runs for president, which I think he will, at the largesse that he's offered and what it's cost the citizens of California. We're going to lose our hospital because he said, boy, if you get across that border and you're sick, you're going to get medical care tomorrow. Well, fine. But, 50% of the health care provided at Watsonville Community Hospital is funded through Medi-Cal. I don't like seeing it lumped together with Medicare because Medicare is funded by the people receiving it. But, Medi-Cal is not. That's 100%, come and get it free.
I want to get back to the tort reform thing. When you talk about malpractice insurance, obviously you're not saying, well, there should be no thing as an ability to sue or recover from malpractice. Certainly, you and I agree that if there is malpractice and a person suffers real injury, they are entitled to sue and recover. The problem is that the laws concerning these suits and the conditions under which they are brought and argued are set by each state. There is no national standard here. Each state has its own set of laws governing torts in that state. It is possible to look at the various states and find different systems. In no state is there no such thing as a malpractice suit. All 50 states you can sue if a physician or a medical practitioner botches your care. That's not the question. The question is, under what conditions can those suits be brought and argued? What kind of damages can be asked for? And what kind of attorney fees can be paid? And what kind of legal tactic can be indulged in? When it comes to medical malpractice, we think, a person has been wronged and they draw a benefit. And of course, the doctor pays for insurance in case he does drop the wrong scalpel or something and he botches a procedure. He's covered for this. But most of the money that is flowing into the medical malpractice field does not go to victims who have been disadvantaged. No, it goes to attorneys. And I think we can all agree that money paid to attorneys does not make a healthy, a sick person well. Attorneys don't do that. So when I asked, are you calling for tort reform? And you kind of breezed on. No, you are calling for tort reform, and you should. Just last week, I believe I had a piece on this program about how in the state of Florida, tort reforms had resulted in tremendous improvements in the market for insurance. In this particular case, homeowners insurance, etc. Once again, by ending abusive practices that essentially used the tort system to enrich attorneys, didn't do that much for claimants, but drove costs up tremendously. Florida is now seeing more companies wish to come in and offer insurance in Florida, companies offering reduced premiums, even rebates. This is the kind of race to the bottom you want to have. You want to have companies bidding against each other for your business. This can be done with healthcare as well. We have a couple of, there's Hazel Hawkins over in Gilroy, or Salinas, I guess it is, or Gilroy. There's Dominican, there's Watsonville. Hospitals should be bidding for your business and making their prices attractive to you, but they can't because of, tort reform is one of the things that would help them lower that burden. So I'm glad you raised the issue.
Well, here in California, you can go out and get all drunk at night at the bar, be driving home, crash into a tree, go through the windshield, the ambulance comes and gets you, takes you to the hospital, you pass away in the hospital, and the family's going to sue that hospital because the medical care didn't save their loved one. That is an actual case here in California that you can do. You have a sibling that is a drug addict all their life, lives out on the sidewalk because you don't want them in their house. Take them in the hospital. They pass away in the hospital through fentanyl or whatever. Those loving family members sue the hospital because their brother or uncle or whatever passed away due to negligent medical care at that hospiel.
Well,
It's just an open door.
Well, on the surface, on the surface of it, Mark, that sounds outrageously unfair, and I'm wondering if you're presenting that actually absolutely accurate, because it sounds incredible. But then again, I'm always saying here, if you run across something in a situation that makes no sense and is absolutely inexplicable, the question you ask is, what did government do to bring this about? And again, the example you just gave, if this is the case, if this is really the way things are, then it screams out for tort reform. We need reform of our tort system. And frankly, this may be an issue that Republicans could get some votes on, although most people, you say tort reform and they don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I hope so. And again, it's why medical care is so expensive here in California. The other thing is that you've got the majority of the people going to our local hospital, not paying their bill, having no private insurance or whatever, the responsibilities there. Fine, you don't want the indigent people dying out on the streets, but you don't want the system abused either. And it is, and it's going to affect us here in our local community. And I think it goes back to what you're saying, is the largesse of government. Oh, this sounds great, but guess what? The chickens do come home to roost every now and then.
I was just thinking that one of the things that my father came up with one time years ago was the idea that nobody should ever go to the doctor and not pay. The idea that you could go into an emergency room, get treated, and pay nothing. No, you can't do that. There should be a minimum charge on, medical services. And I asked, what do you think the minimum ought to be? He said, something like $10. And I said, well, $10 won't cover the cost of treatment. He says, no, of course not. It's not supposed to cover the cost of treatment. It's supposed to provide a notice to people, hey, if you want medical care, it's here for you. It will cost you $10. That's not an impossibly high sum. Anybody can come up with $10. But the idea being, if you have to pay that $10, then you're not going to abuse the system. When, your kid falls and cuts his finger, you're not going to take him to the emergency room and waste everybody's time and use up God knows how many thousands of dollars worth of resources. You're going to buy a bottle of iodine and a Band-Aid, and you're going to fix it. So the idea of people accessing medical care for nothing, I tend to agree with that. There should be some nominal charge every time you walk in and expect to be treated.
Well, when the good sisters ran Dominican Hospital, my first child, my daughter, I went in, signed up for prenatal care, and then the birth services and all. Then the nun at the desk, we sat in there, and she was, that's fine. That'll be $5,000 to come up with right away. And thank God I had some medical insurance, but I had to come up with a pretty big check to get enrolled into their program. But I took my wife to Watsonville Hospital one evening for a emergency, and I'm sitting in the emergency waiting room watching TV, and the woman comes out, and I thought, she was going to say, how my wife was doing, and she said, we need $250. That's what the deductible on your health insurance is for emergency room care, $250 deductible that I had to pay her right then. But there were 30 people in that room. She did not come out and approach one other family member or whatever at that. I was the only one. So goes to show they know where the money is, and they will grab it.
Well, again, if you have a deductible, then you're liable for that deductible. But all those other people there should have had to pay $10.
No, they didn't pay anything. But, yeah. Anyhow, you're right. Largesse of government is detrimental, and it comes back locally. And, if our local hospital goes under, I hope people realize next time they go vote.
I don't know what people are thinking of these days when they go to vote. Frankly, I'm rather I'm not very sanguine about the future insofar as that's concerned. I'm glad that I won't. I've got a few more years left, and after that, I won't have to sit through any more of it. I've just about had it.
We shall see. Be interesting times. Well, thank you for the time, Charlie.
Thank you for the call, Mark. Always good to hear from you. Have a pleasant day. Okay, well, that was great. We had a couple of people to talk with during that second hour, and I'm very glad. Rather a discouraging finish to that phone call there. I got to say, as I look around at, I'm looking at election results because that's what determines where we go. And a year ago, we had the left represented by a really not a competent politician, not a very, certainly nobody's idea of a vote getter. When she ran for president, she got nowhere. She gets the nomination gifted to her, and she goes out and blows it and blows it and blows it, and she still only falls a point and a half short. That's weird. Now, the American electorate is getting more and more disjointed from reality. Next president will probably be somebody like Gavin Newsom. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. I'll be back in 6 minutes. See you then. Oh, we're talking about it. Here's
Introducing Miracle Balm from Jones Road Beauty.
Stop it.
Miracle Balm doesn't cover up your natural skin. It enhances it.
There we go.
At some point in 2023, the number of views of the hashtag Roman Empire on TikTok passed 1 billion. This social media craze originated when girlfriends began asking their boyfriends how often they thought about the Roman Empire. The typical answer was supposedly every day. Are we Rome? American historians and public intellectuals may not ask this question every day, but they ask it quite frequently. In 2007, Cullen Murphy published a book with that title. He revisited the subject in April 2021, drawing breathless parallels between the scenes at the Capitol the previous January 6th and the sack of Rome. Outside, Murphy wrote, a pandemic raged, recalling the waves of plague that periodically swept across the Roman Empire. This kind of historical hyperventilation has been a recurrent feature of the Trump era. Writing for Time in December 2018, Edward Watts asserted that the most significant danger old republics like ours face is not the sudden assault of an aspiring autocrat, but the slow erosion of their cultural and institutional defences. Tim Elliott drew an even more direct connection in his November 2020 essay for Politico, in which he compared Donald Trump to Julius Caesar. Elliott argued that the American Republic must be on its last legs because Trump, like Caesar, promises to return us to an imagined ancient glory while bulldozing democratic norms, ignoring checks on his power, and eroding political debate. Of course, all these authors neglect to mention the ways in which Trump is not like a Roman emperor. For example, the president is preoccupied with reducing the size of government, not something autocrats are known for, and reducing the regulations on business. He is for free speech and against censorship. He's against foreign wars. But Trump shouldn't take it too personally. The habit of comparing ancient Rome to contemporary America has been a feature of political discourse for much longer than most of us realise. It goes back more than 200 years, indeed to the time of our republic's founding. The founders were as obsessed with Rome as anyone today, maybe even more so. The writers of the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, all took the pen name Publius, evoking Publius Valerius Publicola, one of the Romans who, in 509 BC, overthrew the monarchy and established a republic. George Washington was often compared to the Roman general Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, who, after leading the defense of Rome against attack in 458 BC, preferred to return to his farm rather than retain dictatorial powers. The founders took their Roman history seriously. So should we. Consider, for example, what Polybius is telling us in Book 6 of his Histories, written from around 168 BC. He sets out to show in what manner and under what kind of constitution it came about that nearly the whole world fell under the power of Rome. His explanation was that the Roman Republic enjoyed a mixed constitution that combined elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. Each element balanced out the others and prevented the system sliding into tyranny, oligarchy, or anarchy. The founders got the message. In their republic, the monarchy became the presidency, the aristocracy became the Senate, and the democracy became the House of Representatives. Each would check the power of the other, and like Rome, America thrived under this mixed constitutional system. So how then did the Roman Republic go wrong? The Roman historian Tacitus, writing around 116 AD, gives us our answer. Recurrent and bloody civil war, exemplified by the assassination of Caesar, led Rome to the brink of chaos. Caesar's adopted heir Octavian, Tacitus writes, brought a world exhausted from civil dissension under his authority with the title of first citizen and the impressive new name Augustus. By seducing the military with bonuses, the masses with grain allowances, and everybody with the pleasure of peace, Tacitus tells us, Augustus gradually increased his powers, drawing to himself the functions of Senate, magistrates, and laws. Tacitus was disgusted by the way they all rushed into servitude, consuls, senators, and knights. The higher the rank, the greater the hypocrisy and haste. So, are Trump's critics right? Are we where Romans were in the late Republic, maybe around 29 BC, a few years before Octavian became Princeps Senatus and Augustus? Or is the American Republic, thanks to the genius of our founders, incapable of mutating into an empire and a tyranny the way Rome did? I'm confident we're not Rome, and we can take comfort from the fact that Americans have been worrying about turning Roman ever since the founding. Maybe the time to start seriously worrying about, are we Rome, will be the day we stop asking ourselves that question. I'm Neil Ferguson, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution for Prager University.
Was interesting. Okay, it's about time. Once again, welcome to News Talk. Hour number 3 begins at 11:06 on this lovely Monday morning. I'm Charles Freedman. We've had an active day on the telephone today. No fewer than 3 people have called to offer views and comments. Why don't you be the next? 831-265-5050 is the number. Okay, during this third hour, I'd like to shift our focus a bit to the Western Hemisphere. And I'm watching the actions of President Trump vis-a-vis Venezuela with great interest. Now, President Trump is a guy who came to office campaigning on let's not get into any more overseas wars. He has taken an active hand to help the Israelis win their war against Iran, when the one thing the Israelis couldn't accomplish for themselves, everything else the Israelis did. But when it came to the one thing they couldn't do, Mr. Trump reached out and did it, and that was the use of the special armaments and munitions it took to blow up Iran's underground nuclear facilities. Israel could not do that. Everything else they could and did. But President Trump helped with that. Now in Ukraine, Mr. Trump is turning his back on his former conciliatory to Russia rhetoric, seeming to realize that his idea that he could sweet talk Putin into some kind of a ceasefire, well, that idea was wrong. And Mr. Putin, over the last few months, has disabused the president of it. And like anyone who has been, whose open hand of friendship has been rejected, Mr. Trump is a bit peeved. And as a result now has taken decisions, I'm sure, that will preclude any Russian occupation of Ukraine. I guess there are people in the country who think, well, who cares about Ukraine? I'm sorry, I cannot even understand that question. Ukraine is a part of Europe. Europe is right next door, just across the Atlantic. We as a nation, cannot allow ourselves to believe that our national security concerns stop at the water's edge. That wasn't even a reasonable idea 100 years ago. Today, it's insane. Mr. Trump realizes that. But I guess there are still people in the country who don't. And maybe Mr. Trump is the one who dragged them kicking and screaming into the modern era. I wish him luck, I really do. And so far, he's been doing a fairly effective job of it. The one place where he has actually courted a more active role is Venezuela. And, this has been a kind of a combination of errors on one side and strategy on the other. The error, of course, was Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, who took control and assumed dictatorial powers over a nation very rich in resource. You got this big lake of oil sitting under Venezuela. I think the world's largest or second largest proven reserves. Just a tremendous amount of a very saleable product. And for reasons that they simply dismantled it. Not intentionally. I mean, nobody would take a wrecking ball to the petroleum industry in Venezuela, but that was the effect of what they did. Because when Chavez and then Maduro got into office, instead of having capable, competent people running the Venezuelan oil industry, it suddenly became, okay, we need politically reliable, loyal people. Do they really know what they're doing? Well, that's not as important as making sure that they're controlled. It's kind of like the whole Chinese economy right now. The decisions being taken by Xi Jinping and his orchestra are not what will make China most prosperous. It's what will perpetuate our control. And those are two separate roads. So Venezuela, by essentially removing the people and the financing that kept their oil industry going, now they're pumping what, 20% of what they used to pump? I mean, it's ridiculous. The decline has been precipitous. So you have to look elsewhere for money. And Mr. Maduro in particular has decided, okay, well, we'll just get into the drug trade in a big way. Americans want fentanyl, so we'll sell it to them in huge quantities, and we'll make our money that way. So this was a shift in business model, but President Trump or somebody around him or the president himself took a look at this and said, this is great because I never liked this Maduro guy anyway. But if all he was selling was oil, what could I do? Point and say, hey, he's a bad guy. He's selling oil. We sell oil. But all of a sudden, because of their political incompetence, they can't sell oil anymore, so they're selling drugs. And that is a problem. I've been designating these cartels terrorist organizations. Turns out that Maduro is the head of a giant cartel. Let's use that to justify opposing him and dismantling his operation. So far, what dismantlement have we seen? A rising number of boats interdicted and blown to smithereens at sea. There are those who question, well, are these boats really loaded with fentanyl? I got to admit, when I learn about the capabilities of our intelligence organizations, yes, we can tell when one of these boats is loaded with contraband or not. We can tell that. And frankly, I haven't heard a great number of people saying, well, those haven't really been drug boats. You haven't heard that, have you? And the fact that you haven't heard it is another confirmation that, yep, that's exactly what they were. And this is part of Nicolas Maduro's business model. Now the president has moved the USS Gerald R. Ford off the Venezuelan coast, and holy smoke. They've also reactivated the air base at Roosevelt Roads in Puerto Rico. Preparations are being made for a party. What form will that party take? I don't know. But I do know that Corina Maria Machado, this year's Nobel Peace Prize winner, is the leader of the Venezuelan opposition. A Venezuelan opposition that in the past has been fragmented and ineffective. But over time, and essentially they've learned that the Chavez-Maduro regime is so bad that they can no longer afford to be squabbling among themselves. It is time to put aside those petty differences, unite, and retake Venezuela for the Venezuelan people. So there is a serious resistance there, led by a capable, credible person. So the question of, well, if Maduro suddenly takes a powder and heads for Beijing or Moscow, does essentially what Hafez Assad did. He simply flew from Damascus to Moscow and now lives there in splendor. Baby or two to eat every day, and that's he's fat, dumb, and happy. This would what Maduro should be offered, the opportunity to clear out. You'll be secure. You'll have plenty of things to do, plenty of babies to eat, but you'll be out of power. And of course, it's a hard thing because creeps like that, power is the one thing they care about. More than money, more than anything else. They care about power. Love being able to compel other people's behavior. So it's going to take a lot of pressure to get Maduro to that point. But it looks as if Mr. Trump is getting ready to bring something approaching that degree of pressure. Now, there will be those who, oh, this is just terrible, how we're getting involved in this. No, it's not just terrible. This is our own hemisphere, for one thing. It's right across, the Caribbean is a lake, and it's right across that lake from us. To bring Venezuela from alliance with Russia and China and Iran, I mean, literally, they've got a heavy Iranian presence in Venezuela. The Ayatollah of all people. To flip Venezuela back to the free world would be such a victory. This is the kind of thing that Mr. Trump could present as, you know, a coup ranking with anything we've seen in the post-war era. That big. The only thing that really eclipses it is the fall of the Soviet Union itself. I think the idea appeals to Mr. Trump on those grounds. I think the idea that the country, Venezuela, would have a stable and effective pro-Western government after the deposing of the current regime, all of that works in favor. What else is happening in Latin America right now? Well, they just had the first round of the Chilean presidential election. Now, Chile has an interesting system. They have 2 rounds. First round is a free for all. You know, there might be several candidates. Then after that, the top 2 run off if nobody gets an absolute majority. Well, this time, it's interesting. The candidates who will face off in the runoff are a fellow named Cast, and where's that piece? There we are. Chileans rallied behind, I love this, hardline conservatives. So you figure the way international news is written, anybody who is, for example, like me, is either an arch right-winger or a hardline conservative or a right-wing, the very nature of the people who write the news is such that, in their view, I am outside of the sphere of mainstream politics. Now, frankly, I think that proves they're outside the sphere of mainstream politics. In this particular case, the first round of presidential voting, there were 4 leading conservative candidates. It says here right wing, with more than 60% of the ballots counted. Jose Cast, a 59-year-old ultra-conservative former congressman, 24% of the vote. He's in second place. The first place is Janet Jara of the Communist Party, allied with the incumbent president Gabriel Boric, 27%. Now, obviously, 24%, 27%, that's nowhere near the 50% plus 1 that you need to get elected. So there will be a runoff. The people who voted for other candidates obviously will have to make a selection between Cast and Jara. The operative factor is that the other candidates, who will be eliminated now, were all basically conservatives. So their votes will slip rather easily to Mr. Cast, enabling him to win a victory. Chile has continued to go back and forth since the end of the Pinochet dictatorship, that was an interesting election. Pinochet took over 3 years after Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile. Same type of system they have now. There was first no, wait a minute, that's right. They changed the system, didn't they? That's right, because in 1970, when Salvador Allende was elected, you had a three-way race, and Allende won with something like 37% of the vote. Maybe 38, something like that, but nowhere near a majority. But in those days, the Chilean system was such that, it was the top vote getter who won the job. Since then, they have changed. Well, they have a whole new constitution now since that time. Essentially, if this system had been in force then, Allende would never have become president of Chile. You might say, who were the other two people? There were two other people running for president of Chile in 1970. One of them was a guy named Jorge Alessandro, and he was very, very conservative, very right-wing, and a retired general. And he was the more popular of the opposition candidates, and he came in second. The third place candidate, and this was kind of a surprise, the outgoing president was a man named Eduardo Frei, and he was fairly popular, and he was head of a party, I believe, called the Frei Party, not named after him, but named, the Free Party. That party did nominate a candidate. As I recall, his name was Tomic, Tomic. And you would have thought, well, you've got this outgoing president who's reasonably popular, who's done a good job. Wouldn't the candidate representing his party be well positioned? You would think so, but from what I remember of that campaign, and bear in mind, this is all, 50 years ago, Mr. Tomic was actually described as Mr. Blah Blah. In other words, he was a utterly uninspired and uninspiring candidate for public office. So he turned what should have been a reasonably strong electoral position into a weak third place. But the point here is that if Chile had had a runoff election then, as it does now, Alessandro would probably picked up more of Tomic's vote than Allende would, which would have resulted in Chile avoiding the entire Allende disaster. As it was, Allende took office on this, narrowest of mandates. 37% of the vote? Come on. Almost 2/3 of the people voted against you. But he proceeded to act like, basically a Chilean version of Fidel Castro. We're going to nationalize this. We're going to control that. Inflation began getting out of hand, naturally. He was more like Perón, not Castro. Castro's not a good comparison. A good comparison would be Perón from next door Argentina. Well, people in Argentina had a front row seat for the antics that Argentina has been through for the decades since Perón essentially destroyed the country. Nobody's been able to put it back together since. Javier Milei today is the latest one to try. But the Chilean military, which has been notably reticent about seizing, you think about Latin American countries all the time, military coup, army seizes power. In Chile, that has not been a thing. But in 1973, it suddenly became one. So the military overthrew Allende with assistance from the American CIA. And the next leader was a military man by the name of Pinochet, who ran a dictatorship for 17 years. During that 17 years, Pinochet wrote a new constitution for the country, which is still in force today. As a matter of fact, the leftist administration in Chile right now undertook a few years ago to replace it with a more leftist constitution. The Chilean people, by a very substantial vote, a very strong vote, said no. So the voters of Chile flirt with the left and are sometimes seduced by it, but they come back to their senses in time. It looks like this is one of those years when they're going to come back. After learning he would advance to the next round, Kast urged the fractured right wing to unite behind him, framing it as an existential struggle for Chile's future. It will be the most important election of our generation, a referendum between two models of society, the current one that has led Chile to destruction, stagnation, and violence, and our model for freedom, hope, and progress. An admirer of President Trump and Brazil's former president Bolsonaro, Kast has vowed to deport tens of thousands of undocumented migrants and construct hundreds of kilometers of ditches and walls along Chile's northern border with Bolivia to prevent people from crossing, particularly from crisis-stricken Venezuela. Now we go full circle back to Venezuela again. One of the byproducts of the dictatorship in Venezuela, with Cuba, it's an island. And people who want to leave, they have to somehow leave. Well, they put together a bunch of inner tubes or get a leaky boat or something, and they head for Florida, 90 miles away. And some of them actually make it. But Venezuela is not an island. And much of her border is rather wild terrain. Millions of Venezuelans have simply left the country. This is one of the other reasons why I think President Trump is actively looking at ways to overthrow the Venezuelan dictatorship and return rational rule to that country. Because if that happens, millions of Venezuelans who have not been out of the country all that long will stream back home. And one of the places they won't be going is Chile. The United States of America isn't the only place where displaced people wind up settling. Voters gave Jara a slight edge on Sunday, but Kast will benefit in the second round from a large share of votes that went to three eliminated right-wing challengers. Right-wing. This is according to CNN. So you can figure they're conservatives, rational, reasonable conservatives, who campaigned aggressively on the need to tackle illegal immigration. Well, that's a perfectly rational thing to do, isn't it? You see, in CNN world, that makes you a rabid right-winger or an arch reactionary or something like that. I still don't see myself that way. So it delineates a couple of these people. Chile's constitution does not allow re-election to consecutive terms. So left-wing President Gabriel Boric, whose presidency ends in March, is not standing. Like her opponents, Jara has called insecurity a top priority. This woman is a communist and has described Cuba as a democracy. We liked her at first, but that moment was when our opinion shifted. It seemed like a really closed-minded view. But as a woman, she said she wouldn't vote for Kast, given his history of opposition to divorce and abortion. So, once again, you have a voter where I think I agree with the idea that divorce and abortion should be legal. We agree on the issues. But to describe that as being more important than the existential issues of national policy, I think is a tremendous error in placement of priorities. And that's a heavy charge, really. Because after all, what's national policy about? Priorities. What's important? What's more important? Earlier in this program, I was critical of Mr. Trump because I said once he got into office the second time, he seems to have gone in every direction at once. I suggested that what he should have done was to decide on a couple of priorities and focus on those, rather than attempt to do everything at once. Incidentally, there is one justification for trying to do everything at once, and that's if you think that it's your last chance and you have to move fast on every front. If that's the case, then Mr. Trump evidently shares my view that he is the last gasp of conservatism, and unfortunately, such a problematic gasp that he virtually guarantees the election of whoever the Democrats put up in 2028. If that's the case, then yes, that would explain why he's going in every direction at once, is because he figures that he has to get it all done within his presidency, which of course is a futile thing. Time goes on, presidencies end, policies are reshaped. You want to make a lasting impact, you do two things. Number one, you get stuff through Congress, and number two, you ensure that your party wins the next election. Again, these are why I describe Ronald Reagan as the most successful of our post-war presidents, because he did those things. And he created changes in national policy that lasted, in some cases, decades after he left the office. Even Democrats did not end these policies because they worked and they produced good results. It is 10:33. Telephone number is 831-265-5050. Call within this next 2 minutes, and we'll be talking when we get back.
Bring happiness into your holiday with a fresh and fragrant Lions Club Christmas tree. When you light up the tree, your family's smile will last into January. Pick up your tree from the Lions Club lot at the Portuguese Hall near Costco. 2 to 7 weekdays, 10 to 7 weekends, while they last. Bring happiness into your holiday with a fresh and fragrant Lions Club Christmas tree. All proceeds go to helping those in need in Santa Cruz.
Opens day after Thanksgiving.
The wife says the boat's got to go, no problem. Stored at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul, easy off Highway 1 by the airport. 24-hour security for cars, boats, and RVs. Stored away at Anbar Self-Storage in U-Haul in Freedom.
You made the products, now you have to deliver. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul has the moving vans, shipping boxes, and packing materials you need to deliver them. Easy off Highway 1 on Airport Boulevard by the airport. Anbar Self-Storage and U-Haul in Freedom.
Get hooked up with affordable cannabis at your neighborhood Hook Outlet dispensary. We have locations in Santa Cruz, Capitola, and Watsonville. At each Hook Outlet, you will find unmatched low prices on the Hook's unparalleled selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlets are Santa Cruz County's best source for the finest cannabis at the lowest prices. See for yourself. Stop by any Hook Outlet and say hi. We'll see you there. HookOutlet.com.
Attention content producers. You can have access to a complete digital media production facility at Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on SoCal Avenue. Easily rent video and audio equipment, a studio with green screen, editing suite, and audio booth, all at can't say no rates. Schedule a tour to see for yourself at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
At 11:35, we are back. I've got to admit, I'm curious about this piece. Kurt Schlichter, writing in Town Hall, I've seen his stuff before. He's saying it's time to purge GOP backstabbers, sissies, and narcissists. Now, I'm curious to know just exactly who he's describing here. The Republican Party should be a big tent, but that tent shouldn't include Democrats or Democrat collaborators. Members of our party from weakness, malice, or delusions of moral superiority have been betraying us left and right lately with political mediocrities empowered by the fact that the margins are so close and the issues are so important that even the most ridiculous of these alleged Republicans can seize a moment of power simply by sucking up to the regime media. Much of the focus lately has been on marginal twerps who aren't even Republicans. A malignant rodent, Nick Fuentes, makes no bones about hating the GOP, as does the unstable and malicious Candace Owens. They deserve our contempt, but it's not like they have an R after their name. It's the ones who do, who are the real threat. Fortunately, we have leverage over them. We need to use it to restore the discipline Republicans need. Well, speaking out against Nick Fuentes is going to win my friendship. I could be talking about the ridiculous Thomas Massey, a pompous buffoon who embraces the silly ideology that is libertarianism. He only matters temporarily, and not that much, since we always know he won't be with us when we need him. He's taking his shot because the GOP majority in the Congress is so small. Otherwise, he'd go back to being what he was before, a fringe crank no one cared about. But he's using this opportunity to grab the spotlight for a brief shining moment. We've got important things to do in fighting the Democrats, but we need to spare a moment to fight him. The president has a right to support a primary challenge. We can't tolerate his shenanigans. When he finally goes away, it'll be appropriately a result of distancing himself, distracting us from important fights. But distracted we must be. Well, I'm really glad to see him saying that. I don't like the idea that he says libertarianism is silly. But anything carried to a ridiculous extreme gets silly. And that's the problem with Mr. Massey. Libertarianism is a good idea. I'm very sympathetic to it. I have a lot of libertarian ideas myself. Libertarianism is freedom, and I'm for it. But if you carry it to its ultimate extremes, it becomes ridiculous. I remember one time years ago, I was carrying on a debate on my program with some cat from, they call themselves the Prometheus Institute back in New Hampshire. And this was a libertarian group of people. And the topic we were on was immigration. And he was basically taking the point that, well, people should be free to go anywhere they want at any time, anywhere. And, I said, well, what you're arguing is that there should be no nation states. That, no group of people, no nation has the right to simply draw a border and say, okay, this is our territory and we control it. And if you want to come in, you knock on the door and we answer and we decide whether you can come in or not. And he said, yeah, that's right. And I said, well, unfortunately, we live in a world in which well over 90% of the population of the world believes in, supports, and is an enthusiastic member of a nation state. So what's your theory? Everybody's crazy but you? And at that point, I think I had game, set, match on him, because it was obvious that he was arguing this theory, this ultra-libertarian extreme theory. Well, absolute freedom, absolute liberty. People have the right to decide to live where they want to live. If that's the case, then if somebody decides they want to live in your spare room, the next time you walk in, you're going to find them sitting there in front of a little fire with a cot, making coffee. Having dug a latrine in the corner. Well, I decided I wanted to live here, but this is my house. I don't care. I mean, how far do you take this foolishness? So I see libertarianism more in the sense that John Stuart Mill defined liberty in his essay on that topic. He said, I'm trying to remember the exact wording. I can't right off the top of my head, but it was basically that you should be free to do anything you want to do, provided it does not impinge upon the legitimate prerogatives of another person. Now, obviously, if somebody comes into your house and decides to take up residence there, they're impinging upon your legitimate prerogatives. So they may not do that. They do not have that liberty. And the same argument extends to nation states, which are, after all, made up of human beings, people. It's all about people. So the American people have a nation state, and we have, through our elected representatives, enacted certain laws regarding entering the country. And anybody who is in favor of enforcing those laws is excoriated as some kind of a fascist. I'm sorry. Doesn't work that way. But the Thomas Masseys of the world, I don't know how far he takes it. He obviously won't vote for any budget bill that isn't, a balanced budget right this minute, which means he won't vote for anything. He constantly forgets that members of the House and Senate are never treated, anytime there's a measure on the floor, how many ways can you vote? Yay or nay? Yes or no? Okay, that's step one. Step two, any given measure that is brought to the floor is not going to be perfect. These are all pieces of legislation crafted by human beings. Each and every one of them has flaws. Mr. Trump's big bill from last spring had flaws. It had more good than bad, and so for that reason, it deserved passage. And that is the criterion. And the Thomas Masseys of this world don't see that. This bill isn't perfect. I won't vote for it. At this point, and I've said this on the program in the past, Mr. Massey is in the wrong business. He should not be in politics. He should be in the clergy. He should be a minister preaching the gospel, where you can talk about perfection and heaven and salvation and all those wonderful things that Mr. Massey wants that you cannot accomplish through government. And that, incidentally, is one of the biggest problems with modern American politics, is that too many people, particularly younger people, are seduced by those who come along like the Zoran Mamdanis of the world and say, vote for me, and you'll have free this and free that and perfect this, and I promise you utopia. I wonder if young people, I don't understand. I'm not a young person today, so I don't pretend to understand who they are, what they think, and what they've seen and what motivates them. But it seems to me that too many of them, have never been told there is no utopia. There is no utopia, and anyone who approaches you promising one, you should immediately turn away from, because that person is hawking snake oil. A person making utopian representations is automatically disqualified from your trust and your vote. Anyway, enough about Thomas Massey. Who else is Kurt Schlichter upset about? I could be talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is green with envy at the candidates like Mike Collins, who actually have a chance of winning back a Georgia Senate seat we need so much. She's so mad at Trump for refusing to back her certain-to-fail campaign for the seat, she's defected to the left, to the point of being received by the harpies of The View as a prodigal daughter. I remember that. And Marjorie Taylor Greene was thinking of running for Senate from Georgia. This is a, let's be gentle and say, extreme and divisive person. And if she were the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in a state like Georgia, she would lose. We've seen, how many examples of these fringe candidates that we put up, and they lose. Kerry Lake in Arizona. Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. And again, Republicans nominate these fringe candidates. They go down in flames, and we lose elections that we should have won. Well, President Trump was evidently the one who personally took a role in discouraging Marjorie Taylor Greene from running for Senate. And evidently, she took umbrage. Evidently, we're all talking in politics. To get into that field, you need a healthy ego. Evidently, Ms. Taylor Greene was of the opinion that not only could she win, but that Donald Trump owed her his support. Well, Donald Trump is not the kind of person that you come to him and say, you owe me, unless you can present him with dollars and cents figures to show that, hey, you have an obligation, you owe me X amount of dollars, in which case Trump will write you a check. But if you come up and you owe me your support for such and such and such and such, Trump is going to be saying, oh, yeah? And he's going to look at the situation, obviously, from his own standpoint. Do I want to associate myself with this person? Early in his first administration, I noticed that Mr. Trump got rid of Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon has continued, you see his name around, mostly in the mainstream media, because they realize that Mr. Bannon is not too tightly wrapped, and they would like to present him as the face of MAGA. But Donald Trump doesn't present him. And Donald Trump decided he wasn't going to present Marjorie Taylor Greene either. Schleister's way of putting this is great. Trump has hilariously disowned her, complaining about her daily crazy phone calls, among other things. This is good. She's created a distraction because her feelings got hurt. But we have to be distracted to police our own. We can't be a party where it's all about me, and with MTG, it's all about her. Regardless, she's got to go. I'm sure she's going to end up blaming it on the Jews. Then there's the state of Indiana, where I take a special interest. I recently went there to urge the GOP to redistrict 9-0. We're in a redistricting fight. That's what you do when you can. But there are enough Republicans who for some reason refuse to fight that fight, effectively aligning themselves. In other words, there are Republicans who want to oppose gerrymandering, which is now becoming, unfortunately, a fight and die political issue. At the end of this road, you have every state in the union with more than one congressional district gerrymandered by the party in power to yield an outrageous number of representatives for that party and the tiniest possible number for the other. California's already gone down that road. Gavin Newsom pulled that off 2 weeks ago. And there was no opposition, no effective opposition. A few ads featuring a fading Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that was it. Meanwhile, the Democrats were bringing in everybody from Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders to Barack Obama. He's their biggest gun. Former President Obama, when you see him show up for something, you know that the priorities are in order. He was appearing in Virginia and New Jersey with Democratic candidates for governor. I noticed Mr. Trump didn't go there. After seeing the results, I can see why not. Mr. Trump probably had some internal polling of his own that showed these people are going to lose, and President Trump wasn't interested in standing with people who were going to go down the tubes. He doesn't have that kind of political courage. Oh, what's happening in the Hoosier states, what happens in deep red states where nobody can get elected to office unless they're nominally Republican. You wind up with a lot of Republicans who would elsewhere join the Democratic Party if it weren't more abundant. But you can solve that problem. We've begun the process in Texas. There were a bunch of Republicans who were happy to go along with Democrats and block a conservative progress. Conservative Texans, organized, focused, got rid of a bunch of them at election time. The process isn't complete, but it can be done. And Texas managed to redistrict. Indiana's Governor Mike Braun is pushing to redistrict. Just the other day, Senate Pro Tem Roderick Bray announced there weren't enough GOP votes to do it. Bray. Back in 1964, there was a congressman from Indiana named William G. Bray. I wonder if it's... I'm going to find out, by God. With a computer, I can do that these days. Yeah, what's the guy's name? Roderick. R-O-D-R-I-C. R-O-D-R-I-C. Bray. B-R-A-Y. Okay. There he is. Wikipedia. Okay. Born. Okay. His father served in the House of Representatives 1974 to 92. That was Richard. And the Indiana Senate from 1994 to 2012. His grandfather, William G. Bray, member of the House from 1951 to 1975. Yeah, he got wiped out in the Watergate wave. William Gilmer Bray. So his grandson is now President pro tem of the Indiana Senate. Ha ha, how do you like that? Well, at least I have proof that I don't have Alzheimer's, by God. I can still drag out stuff like that. I know I'm hitting on all 8 cylinders. Let's, we've still got 8 minutes or so left. Who else is Kurt Schleister clouding up and raining all over? Schleister's really mean and nasty when he writes. Indiana spawned an utterly loser Republican before. Mike Pence. Look at me, Christian. Wow. So Mike Pence is a devout and true Christian, and now that is a disqualifier. Holy smoke, this is hot stuff. Mitch Daniels, the Cory Booker of the Midwest. Mitch Daniels and Mike Pence, between them, were both governors of Indiana, and between them put in policies that, well, they institute the right to work in Indiana. They lowered taxes, balanced budgets. I mean, Indiana became the showplace in the Midwest insofar as economic policy was concerned, drawing people from neighboring states like Michigan and in particular Illinois. And Kurt Schleister now takes those people with their solid record of accomplishment and simply trashes them and calls them names. I'm sorry, that is really not too bright. They also have a Senator, Todd Young, who apparently finds Donald Trump and other Republicans with spines icky. Yeah, that's, we're told, well, if you don't go along with everything that MAGA wants, you're spineless. I'm sorry, that is a characterization that in itself should be disqualifying. Let's talk about the policy. On this program, I have criticized President Trump for not wanting to tackle the biggest single issue facing the American Republic today. Am I calling him spineless? In a sense, yes. He doesn't have the guts to lead this country in some kind of honest effort to reform our budgetary and tax system. And incidentally, people always talk about, well, you've got to cut government spending. It's nice to do that, but the one time in recent history when we brought the budget into balance, during the 1990s under Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole, the budget continued to increase every year, although those increases were held to a reasonable level. But there was never a budget where this year's budget is lower than last year's. So there were never any budget cuts. What happened was the American economy took off and grew and became more productive and yielded more tax revenue. And presently, the same tax system that was producing deficits in 1993 was by 1998 producing surpluses. We grew our way out of that deficit. And that, incidentally, is the only way to confront the problems we have now, the only effective way. The American people will not allow significant budget cuts. Oh, they say they will. But the minute you attempt any kind of budgetary reduction, the harpies all fly out. So the only serious chance we have of bringing the budget into balance or making progress on that is to increase the size of our economy, to grow our way out of it. And that will require, given the amount of debt we've now piled up, that's going to require a dynamic economy. And that is what President Trump should be focused on right now. And you don't do it by imposing tariffs on everything under the sun. And you don't do it by failing to bring inflation under control. So for Kurt Schlichter to describe people as spineless, well, I don't know what it takes. This is really funny. I have some questions. Schlichter is still fomenting about the redistricting in Indiana, which I think would get us 1 or 2 more seats, so it's no big deal. But obviously the right thing to do is not gerrymander. Take the cell phone from one of your myriad underlings, hit speed dial for your state director, the one who's betraying the president, and repeat after me. Listen, you stupid dip blank, I don't know what the hell you were thinking, but you better unblank your blank before I come back there and kick your blank in the next week, you stupid piece of blank. Fix this. If we don't have a 9-0 map by New Year's, I'm going to make you my personal project. When I finish with you, you won't be able to get elected county cornhole inspector. Is there anything unclear about what you're going to do? Blank, stick, I didn't think so, click. Oh, geez. Isn't that charming? I guess that's what, see, that's innovative, decisive, uncompromising leadership. Oh, my God. I guess in the 21st century, in the third decade of the 21st century, that's what we've got to do. So that's his real target here, are people who don't want to gerrymander Indiana. In other words, people who really do want to do the right thing and want to practice good politics. It just happens to be that it's not the partisan dish du jour. They want to play Newsom's game and Pritzker's game. Well, the only justification is that the other side has done it. And again, you go up to your mom and say, well, Joe did this, and that never flew very far, at least not with my mother. Okay, about time to clear out of here. I got to go see my chiropractor and get my back cracked. That happens every 2 weeks, and I'm looking forward to it because I've got a little bit of sciatica going on. So, it is now noon. I will see you tomorrow morning at 9:06. Thank you for listening. Have a pleasant day. I'm Charles Freedman. So long. Okay. Do you want to? Yeah, I guess I better. Zippity-doo-dah. Zippity-dah. Episode 238.